The stars outside the observation window did not move. They had not moved for 6 days. Empress of the Dominion stood alone in the darkness, her silver eyes fixed on the endless void beyond the glass. Behind her, the great flagship of her empire sat silent and dead. The Celestial Mandate was the most powerful ship ever built by any species in the known galaxy. It was 3 miles long from bow to stern. Its hull was made of metals that other races could not even name. Its engines could fold space itself, allowing it to cross 1,000 light years in the time it took to draw a single breath. Poets had written songs about it. Enemies had surrendered at the mere sight of it. It was the symbol of power, of superiority over all lesser beings in the universe. And now it was broken. The Empress turned away from the window as the door behind her slid open. Lord, her chief advisor, entered the room with his head bowed low. He was followed by 2 soldiers who held a mail between them. The male wore the uniform of a chief engineer, but his badges of rank had been removed. His face was pale with fear. "Your Majesty," said, "Chief Engineer has completed his final examination of the quantum fold drive." The Empress looked at. He was the 28th engineer she had assigned to fix her ship. 27 had failed before him. She had given him 3 days to succeed where the others had not. Those 3 days were now over. "Speak," she commanded. His voice shook as he answered. "Your Majesty, I have run every diagnostic algorithm known to science. I have consulted with my predecessors. I have examined every system, every subsystem, every component of the drive core. I cannot find the source of the malfunction." "You cannot find it," the Empress repeated. Her voice was soft, but everyone in the room could hear the cold anger beneath her words. "The quantum fold matrix is operating within acceptable parameters," continued, speaking faster now. "The probability cascade generators are aligned perfectly. The power distribution network shows no faults. According to every measurement we can take, the drive should be working. But when we try to activate it, the system shuts itself down. We do not know why." The Empress walked toward him slowly. She was tall for a female, and when she stood before, she looked down at him like a queen looking at an insect. "I gave you 3 days," she said. "I gave you access to every resource on this ship. I gave you the notes and findings of the 27 engineers who came before you, and you tell me that you do not know why my ship will not fly." Fell to his knees. "Your Majesty, please. The technology is too complex. Something is wrong at a level we cannot see or measure. Perhaps if we return to our scientists there could." "Return to the Empress's voice rose sharply. "We are dead in space, fool. We cannot return anywhere. That is the problem." She turned her back on him and walked to the window again. "Take him away. Strip him of his rank and his title. He will spend the rest of his life cleaning waste systems on a mining station." The soldiers dragged from the room. His cries for mercy echoed in the corridor until the door slid shut and cut them off. Remained behind. He waited in silence for a long moment before he spoke. "Your Majesty, there are no more certified quantum specialists in the Empire. We have tried every engineer with the proper qualifications. All of them have failed." "Then find engineers without the proper qualifications," the Empress replied. "Search every world in the Dominion. Search the colonies. Search the client states. I do not care where they come from or what their backgrounds are. Find me someone who can fix my ship." Hesitated. The Empress noticed and turned to face him. "You have something to say, say it." "Your Majesty, we have already searched the Dominion thoroughly. Every engineer of any skill has been consulted, but there is another option." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "There is a human trading station at the edge of this sector. The humans sometimes have unconventional approaches to technical problems." The Empress stared at him. "Humans? You suggest I bring humans onto my ship?" "I merely present the option, Your Majesty. The humans are a young species, primitive by our standards. They have only been traveling between stars for a few of their generations. They still use chemical rockets and combustion engines. Their technology is crude. Then why would you suggest them? Chose his next words carefully. Because they are known for one thing, Your Majesty. They are known for making broken things work. Their world is harsh, and they have survived by repairing and adapting whatever they can find. They do not have our elegance or our precision, but they have a certain stubbornness. They do not accept that something cannot be fixed. The Empress considered this. She had met humans before, of course. Small, soft creatures with strange hair on their heads and an odd habit of smiling when they were happy. They were not impressive. They were barely more advanced than the animals they had evolved from. The thought of allowing one of them to touch the sacred engines of the celestial mandate was almost offensive. But she had no other options. Send for the humans, she said at last. Find the best engineer they have and bring them here. But she fixed him with a cold stare. If this fails, if the human cannot fix my ship, I will hold you responsible for the insult you have brought upon the Dominion. Do you understand? Bowed his head. I understand, Your Majesty. He left the room quickly, already sending messages to the human station. The Empress remained at the window, looking out at the unmoving stars. Somewhere out there, her enemies were learning that her flagship was disabled. Somewhere out there, they were making plans, gathering their forces, preparing to strike at the moment of weakness. She had days at most, perhaps only hours. If the ship was not repaired soon, everything she had built would come crashing down. She closed her silver eyes and made a silent vow. Whoever fixed her ship, whether or human or anything else, would be rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. And whoever failed her next would suffer a fate worse than anything could imagine. The Empress of the Dominion did not accept failure, not from others, and not from herself. Gary Mitchell was lying under a broken cooling unit when the aliens came for him. He had been working on the machine for 3 hours and he was covered in grease and sweat. His back hurt. His bad knee was aching again. He was 53 years old, and some days he felt every single year of it. The cooling unit belonged to a restaurant on the human trading station called Harmony Point. The owner, a friendly woman named, had offered to pay him double if he could fix it before the dinner rush. Gary had promised her he would try. He always tried. That was the one thing he was good at. He heard footsteps approaching. Heavy footsteps, heavier than any human would make. Then a shadow fell over him, blocking the light he was using to see the broken parts. You are the human called Mitchell, a deep voice asked. Gary slid out from under the cooling unit and looked up. Standing above him were 3 soldiers. They were tall, almost 7 feet each, with pale blue skin and eyes that looked like polished silver coins. They wore armor that seemed to glow with its own inner light. They carried weapons that Gary did not recognize but could guess were very dangerous. He had seen before, of course. Everyone on Harmony Point had. They were the rulers of this part of space, the most powerful species in a dozen sectors. They rarely spoke to humans. They considered humans to be primitive, barely worth noticing. Gary had never had to speak to him directly. He got to his feet slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. That's me. Something I can help you with. You will come with us, the lead soldier said. The Empress requires a technician. Gary laughed before he could stop himself. I think you've got the wrong guy, friend. I'm not a technician. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. Trucks, tractors, air conditioners. He pointed at the cooling unit behind him. This kind of stuff. I don't know anything about your alien technology. We did not ask what you know, the soldier replied. We asked you to come with us. Gary shook his head. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I've got work to do. Needs this cooling unit fixed by tonight, and I promised her. The soldier's weapon hummed to life. A soft blue glow appeared at its tip. That was not a request, the soldier said. Gary looked at the weapon. He looked at the 3 soldiers who were now standing in a half circle around him. He thought about his daughter, back on Earth, waiting for him to send money for her treatments. He thought about all the things he still needed to do. Then he put down his rag and nodded. "Let me get my tools," he said. The ship that took him to the Celestial Mandate was larger than any vehicle Gary had ever been inside. It moved through space without any sound or vibration. Through the windows, he watched stars slide past like drops of rain on glass. One of the soldiers noticed him staring and made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Primitive," the soldier muttered to his companions. "He has never seen real technology before." Gary pretended not to hear. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with people who looked down on you was to ignore them. Besides, they were right. He was primitive. He was a mechanic from a small town in Ohio who had only come to space because it was the only way to make enough money to save his daughter's life. He did not belong here. But here he was anyway. The Celestial Mandate appeared in the window like a small moon. Gary felt his breath catch in his chest as the ship grew larger and larger until it filled his entire view. He had never seen anything so big. He had never imagined anything so big. It made him feel very small and very human. The shuttle docked, and the soldiers led him through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were made of some material that shifted color as he walked past. The lights came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The air smelled clean and slightly sweet, like flowers he could not name. Finally, they reached a massive door that opened into an engine room the size of a football stadium. Gary stopped and stared. The machine in the center of the room was enormous. It rose from the floor like a metal mountain, covered in pipes and cables and panels that blinked with lights of every color. Dozens of engineering uniforms walked around it, checking readings on tablets and talking in worried voices. None of them looked happy. "This is the quantum fold drive," one of the soldiers explained. "It is broken. You will fix it." "I will what now?" Gary asked. But the soldiers were already walking away, leaving him alone in the middle of the room. Gary stood there for a long moment, feeling the eyes of every engineer on him. They looked at him like he was a bug that had crawled into their kitchen. Some of them whispered to each other and laughed. One of them, a tall male with golden marks on his uniform that probably meant he was important, walked over to stand in front of Gary. "This is the human solution?" he asked, looking Gary up and down with obvious disgust. "This is what they send to fix the greatest engine ever built. A creature without neural implants, without quantum training, without even basic education in fold mechanics." Gary did not answer. He was looking past the engineer at the massive machine behind him. He was listening to the sounds it made. He was watching the way the lights flickered in certain places. He was doing what he had always done when he was faced with something broken. He was paying attention. "I am chief engineer," the continued. "I have spent my entire life studying quantum mechanics. I have 17 advanced degrees. I have published over 200 research papers, and I could not fix this engine. What makes you think you can?" Gary finally looked at him. "I don't think anything yet," he said quietly. "I just got here. Give me some time to look around." Laughed. Look around. With what, those tiny eyes, those primitive senses? You cannot even see quantum fluctuations. You cannot detect probability cascades. You are blind and deaf to everything that matters in this room. Gary nodded. "Maybe so, but I've fixed a lot of things in my life that people said couldn't be fixed. Tractors, trucks, factory machines. My ex-wife's opinion of me. Well, okay, not that last one, but the point is I don't give up easy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. It was old and dented, the same flashlight he had used for 20 years back on Earth. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Gary said, "I need to take a look at your engine." And before anyone could stop him, he walked toward the quantum fold drive with his little flashlight in his hand and his tool bag over his shoulder, ready to do what he had always done. Ready to fix something broken, Gary spent the first hour just walking. He walked around the entire base of the quantum fold drive, moving slowly, stopping often to look at different parts of the machine. He did not touch anything. He did not ask any questions. He just walked and looked and listened. The engineers watched him from a distance. Some of them laughed at him. Some of them shook their heads in disbelief. A few of them placed bets on how long it would take before he gave up and admitted he had no idea what he was doing. The chief engineer stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He had been forced to stay in the engine room as a consultant, along with all 27 other engineers who had failed before him. It was a punishment from the Empress. They had to watch someone else try to fix what they could not. They had to witness their own failure every single day. "This is ridiculous," muttered to the engineer standing next to him. "Look at him. He is crawling on the floor like an animal. He is using a handheld light source. A light source. As if that will help him see quantum fluctuations." The other engineer nodded. "He has been walking in circles for over an hour. He has not even connected to the diagnostic systems. How can he hope to find the problem if he does not access the data?" Gary, of course, could hear none of this. He was too focused on the machine in front of him. To the quantum fold drive was a miracle of advanced science. They saw it as a complex system of probability matrices and cascade generators and fold calculations. They thought about it in terms of mathematics and theory and algorithms. Gary saw it differently. To him, it was just a machine. A very big, very complicated machine, but still just a machine. And machines, no matter how advanced, all had the same basic needs. They needed power. They needed cooling. They needed all their parts to be connected and working properly. They needed to be clean and well-maintained. And most importantly, they needed everything to fit together just right. Gary got down on his hands and knees near the base of the drive. His bad knee complained loudly, sending a sharp pain up his leg. He ignored it. He had been ignoring that knee for 20 years. A little more pain would not stop him now. He shined his flashlight into a narrow gap between two large metal panels. The gap was barely wide enough for him to see into. He moved the light slowly, carefully, looking at every surface, every connection, every joint where one piece of metal met another. "What is he doing?" one of the younger engineers asked. "Why is he looking there? There is nothing important in that section. It is just the exhaust system." "Perhaps he is tired," another engineer suggested. "Perhaps he is looking for a place to sleep. I hear humans need a lot of sleep. Their brains are very small." The joke got a few laughs but did not join in. He was watching Gary carefully now. There was something about the way the human moved, something about the intense focus in his eyes. Had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of his own teachers, long ago, when they were on the edge of discovering something important. He shook off the thought. It was foolish. The human was just a primitive mechanic. He could not possibly understand technology. Gary continued his examination for another 2 hours. He crawled under parts of the machine that No had visited in years. He squeezed into spaces that were almost too small for his body. He got dust and grease on his clothes and his hair on his face. By the time he finally stood up, he looked like he had been working in a coal mine. He stretched his back, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles. Then he walked over to where and the other engineers were standing. "I need to talk to whoever's in charge," he said. Raised one eyebrow. "I am in charge of this engine room, human. What do you want?" "Not you," Gary said. "I need to talk to the Empress." The room went completely silent. Every in the engine room turned to stare at Gary, even seemed shocked. "You cannot simply request an audience with the Empress," said. "She is the ruler of the entire Dominion. You are a primitive mechanic from a backward planet. You do not have the right to speak to her." Gary shrugged. "Then I guess I'll just wait here until she shows up. She wants her ship fixed, right? Sooner or later she's going to come down here to check on things. I can wait." He sat down on a nearby crate and crossed his arms. stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a growl of frustration, he activated his communication device and spoke rapidly in. A few minutes later, the doors of the engine room slid open. Empress walked in. She was taller than Gary had expected, taller than any of her soldiers. Her skin was the color of starlight, and her silver eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. She wore a robe that flowed around her like liquid metal. Every in the room dropped to their knees as she passed. Gary did not kneel. He stood up from his crate and faced her directly. "You are the human," the Empress said. Her voice was cold and clear like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "You have been examining my ship for 3 hours. What have you found?" Gary took a deep breath. He had fixed a lot of things in his life. He had dealt with a lot of difficult customers, but he had never had to tell a galactic empress that her entire engineering team had missed something obvious. "Found your problem," he said. The silence in the room grew even deeper. Stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Impossible," he shouted. "We ran 17 million diagnostic algorithms. The quantum fold matrix is operating within acceptable parameters. The probability cascade generators are aligned to 0.003%. There is nothing wrong with the theoretical systems." "Maybe not," Gary agreed, "but your exhaust coupling is cracked." "Blinked the what?" "The exhaust coupling. Little piece of metal about the size of my fist. It connects your main drive to the secondary cooling system. There's a hairline crack running right through the middle of it. Every time you try to start the engine, the heat makes the metal expand. The crack opens up. You lose pressure. The safety system detects the pressure loss and shuts everything down." He pointed toward the base of the machine, toward the gap he had been shining his flashlight into earlier. "I saw it myself. It's not in any of your fancy computer systems. It's just a cracked piece of metal, nothing more complicated than that." Was shaking his head. "That cannot be the problem. The exhaust coupling is a simple mechanical component. It has no bearing on quantum fold calculations. It is not even monitored by our diagnostic systems." "I know," Gary said. "That's why you missed it. You were so busy looking at the complicated stuff that you forgot to check if the simple stuff was working." He turned back to the Empress. "I can fix it," he said. "Give me access to your machine shop in about 4 hours. I'll have your ship flying again by tonight." The Empress studied him for a long moment. Her silver eyes seemed to look right through him, seeing things that no human could see. Then slowly she nodded. "Do it," she said. The machine shop was unlike anything Gary had ever seen. The tools floated in the air. The lights followed him wherever he walked. The walls displayed instructions in languages he could not read and symbols he did not understand. Everything was clean and perfect and completely alien. But Gary did not care about any of that. He cared about one thing, finding materials he could work with. He walked through the shop slowly, examining everything. There were metals here that he had never seen before. Some of them glowed. Some of them changed color when he touched them. Some of them were so light that they seemed to float in his hands, while others were so heavy that he could barely lift them. Finally, he found what he was looking for. In a corner of the shop, there was a pile of scrap metal, pieces that had been thrown away, parts that had been replaced, things that they considered to be garbage. To Gary, it was treasure. He dug through the pile until he found a block of metal that felt right in his hands. It was dense and strong. It did not glow or change color. It was just metal, simple and solid. "That material is outdated," a voice said behind him. Gary turned to see standing in the doorway. The chief engineer had followed him to the machine shop, along with several others who wanted to watch the human work. "The alloy you are holding was used in ships over 100 years ago," continued. "It has been replaced by materials that are far superior, lighter, stronger, more resistant to heat and pressure." Gary nodded. "Maybe so, but this is what I know how to work with. This is what I can shape and cut and form with my own hands. Your fancy new materials might be better, but they won't do me any good if I can't use them." He carried the block of metal to a workbench and set it down. Then he opened his tool bag and began to lay out his equipment: a hammer, a set of wrenches, files and sandpaper, a small welding torch that he had brought from Harmony Point, calipers for measuring. The engineers stared at his tools with expressions of horror and disbelief. "Those are hand tools," one of them said. "Primitive hand tools. Is he going to build a spaceship part with a hammer?" "This is madness," another agreed. The original exhaust coupling was manufactured in zero-gravity conditions using molecular assembly. Every atom was placed in exactly the right position. His crude replacement will fail within seconds. Gary ignored them. He had heard this kind of talk before. People had said the same things when he rebuilt the engine of his first truck. They had said the same things when he fixed the combine harvester that everyone else had given up on. They had said the same things his entire life. He had learned to let his work speak for itself. First, he needed to see the original part. He went back to the engine room and carefully removed the cracked exhaust coupling from the quantum fold drive. It was heavier than he expected, and the crack was even worse than he had first thought. The metal had been weakened by years of stress. Sooner or later, it would have broken completely. He carried the broken part back to the machine shop and studied it carefully. He measured every angle, every curve, every thickness. He turned it over in his hands again and again until he understood its shape perfectly. Then he began to work. He started by cutting the block of scrap metal into a rough shape. They had machines that could do this automatically, but Gary did not know how to use them. Instead, he used a cutting tool that shot a thin beam of light. It took him a while to figure out how it worked, but once he understood it, he found it was not so different from the plasma cutters he had used back on Earth. Once he had the rough shape, he began to refine it. He used his files to smooth the surfaces. He used his calipers to check his measurements again and again. He adjusted and corrected and shaped the metal with his hands, just as he had done 1,000 times before. They watched in silence. Some of them left after the first hour, convinced that the human was wasting his time. Others stayed, unable to look away from the strange sight of a primitive creature building a spaceship part by hand. Stayed the longest. He stood in the corner of the machine shop, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He did not speak. He did not mock. He just watched. Gary worked for 4 hours straight. His hands grew tired. His back ached from bending over the workbench. His bad knee throbbed with every step he took. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Somewhere far away, his daughter was waiting for him. He had to finish this. He had to succeed. Finally, the new coupling was complete. Gary held it up to the light and examined it carefully. It was not as pretty as the original. The surface was slightly rough. The edges were not perfectly smooth. An engineer would have been ashamed to produce something so crude. But it was solid, it was strong, and it would fit. "That will never work," said. He had walked over to stand beside Gary, looking at the new part with critical eyes. "The tolerances are not precise enough. The material is outdated. The construction method is primitive. You are wasting everyone's time." Gary lowered the coupling and looked at, "Maybe, but I've built parts like this my whole life. Tractor parts, truck parts, machine parts, things that other people said wouldn't work, and most of them are still running today, 20 or 30 years later." He grabbed his tool bag and headed for the door. "Let's go install this thing and see what happens." Back in the engine room, Gary climbed back under the quantum fold drive. His bad knee screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He positioned the new coupling carefully, making sure it was aligned perfectly with the surrounding components. Then he began to tighten the bolts that held it in place. He worked slowly and carefully. Each bolt was tightened by hand. Each connection was checked and double-checked. He had learned long ago that most machines did not fail because of big problems. They failed because of small things: a bolt that was not tight enough, a connection that was slightly loose, details that people overlooked because they were too focused on the big picture. Finally, he slid out from under the machine and stood up. "Try it now," he said. The Empress, who had been watching from the doorway, gave the command. The engine room hummed with power. Deep inside the quantum fold drive, something began to glow. The lights on the control panels changed from red to yellow, then from yellow to green. For the first time in 6 days, the celestial mandate came back to life. Stared at his control panel, his mouth open in shock. "It's working," he whispered. "The drive is operating at full capacity. No errors, no warnings, it's actually working." Gary wiped his hands on his rag and allowed himself a small smile. "Told you," he said quietly. "Sometimes the simple solutions are the best ones." The celestial mandate flew again. News spread across the ship like fire through dry grass. Engineers who had spent 6 days in despair now walked through the corridors with smiles on their faces. Soldiers who had feared being stranded in the void forever now stood tall at their posts. The greatest ship in the galaxy was alive once more. And everyone knew who had saved it. Gary did not celebrate. He found a quiet corner of the engine room and sat down on a metal crate, too tired to stand any longer. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. His back felt like someone had beaten it with a hammer. His bad knee had swollen so much that he could barely bend it. But he had done it. He had actually done it. Approached him slowly. The chief engineer looked different now. The arrogance was gone from his face. In its place was something that might have been respect or perhaps just confusion. "I do not understand," said quietly. "I ran 17 million diagnostic algorithms. I consulted with the greatest minds in the Dominion. I examined every quantum system on this ship, and I missed a cracked piece of metal." Gary shrugged. "It happens. You were looking at the complicated stuff. That's what you were trained to do. Nobody told you to check the simple parts." "But how did you know? How did you think to look there?" Gary was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the years he had spent fixing things. Tractors in fields, trucks in garages, factory machines that nobody else wanted to touch. He thought about his father, who had taught him to work with his hands. He thought about his grandfather, who had built an entire farm from nothing but hard work and determination. "My father used to say something," Gary said finally. "He said that when something breaks, the problem is almost never where you think it is. The fancy parts, the expensive parts, the parts everyone worries about, those usually work fine. It's the cheap parts that fail. The parts nobody thinks about. The parts that just sit there doing their job day after day until one day they can't do it anymore." He looked up at, "Your ship is amazing. The most advanced thing I've ever seen. But at the end of the day, it's still just a machine. And machines are simple. They don't care about quantum theory or probability calculations. They just need all their parts to work." Nodded slowly. "I think I understand, but I am not sure I could ever think that way. My training does not allow for such simplicity." "Maybe that's something worth changing," Gary said. Before could respond, a soldier appeared at the entrance to the engine room. "Human," the soldier called out, "the Empress summons you to the throne room." The throne room of the celestial mandate was the most beautiful place Gary had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into shadows. The walls were covered with carvings that told stories of history going back thousands of years. The floor was made of something that looked like liquid silver, solid enough to walk on but seeming to flow and shimmer with every step. At the far end of the room, on a throne carved from a single enormous crystal, sat Empress. Gary walked toward her slowly. His bad knee made him limp, and he was suddenly very aware of how dirty and tired he looked. His coveralls were stained with grease. His hair was messy. He smelled like machine oil and sweat. Every in the room was staring at him. Nobles in fine robes, officers in decorated uniforms, advisors with tablets and documents. They all watched the primitive human approach their empress with expressions of wonder and disbelief. Gary stopped at the base of the throne. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He just stood there, a tired mechanic from Ohio, looking up at the ruler of a galactic empire. "Human," the Empress said. Her voice echoed through the vast room. "You have done what 28 of my finest engineers could not. You have restored the pride of the Dominion. You have saved my ship and perhaps my empire. For this, you will be rewarded. Name what you desire, and if it is within my power, it shall be yours." Gary did not hesitate. He had known what he would ask for from the moment he first stepped onto this ship. "My daughter," he said. "Her name is, she's back on Earth in a hospital. She's very sick. Your people have medical technology that could cure her. That's all I want, nothing else. Just save my little girl." The throne room fell silent. The nobles and officers exchanged glances of surprise. The Empress leaned forward on her throne, studying Gary with those silver eyes that seemed to see everything. "You could have asked for wealth beyond measure," she said. "You could have asked for titles and lands. You could have asked to be made a lord of the Dominion with power and privilege that no human has ever possessed. And instead, you ask for medicine for a child." Gary met her gaze without flinching. "She's my daughter. She's all that matters to me. I came to space to earn money for her treatment. I fix cooling units and water recyclers and whatever else people need fixed, and I send every credit back to Earth. Everything I do is for her." The Empress was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in her expression. It might have been respect. It might have been understanding. It might have been something deeper, something that transcended the differences between their species. "You will have your daughter's cure," she said. "My personal physicians will travel to Earth within the day. They will bring medicines and treatments that human doctors have never seen. Your daughter will recover completely." Gary felt his eyes grow wet. He blinked hard, trying to hold back the tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." "I am not finished," the Empress continued. "From this day forward, any human who wishes to practice engineering within the Dominion will be permitted to do so. Your species may be primitive in some ways, but you have reminded me of something my own people have forgotten." "What's that?" Gary asked. The Empress almost smiled. "That machines are built by hands. That sometimes the solution to a complicated problem is very simple, and that the true measure of any species is not their technology, but what they will sacrifice for the ones they love." 3 weeks later, Gary sat beside a hospital bed on Earth. The room was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting golden patterns on the white sheets. Was awake. Her eyes were clear. Color had returned to her cheeks. For the first time in 2 years, she looked healthy. "Dad," she said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "They told me what you did. They said you fixed an alien Empress's ship. They said you're some kind of hero now." Gary shook his head and smiled. He was crying again, but he did not care. His little girl was going to be okay. Nothing else mattered. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I just fixed a broken part. Same thing I've been doing my whole life." But in the halls of the Dominion, and in the stories that spread from species to species across the galaxy, the tale of the human mechanic grew into legend. The story of a simple man with simple tools who did what the greatest minds in the universe could not. Because sometimes, the most advanced solution is a father who refuses to give up. And that is how humanity began to change the galaxy, one broken machine at a time.